They laughed at her $5 house, until her dog refused to leave one wall. The county office door shut behind her with a dull echo. In her hand, a thin piece of paper. $5. That's all it took. Outside, the desert wind dragged dust across a house no one wanted, half burned and forgotten. People in town had already made up their minds. But as Marlene stepped closer, her German shepherd didn't hesitate. He walked straight inside. Would you have turned back or taken that first step in? The wind in Red Hollow always carried dust, not enough to choke you, just enough to remind you that nothing stayed new for long out here. It slipped through open windows, settled into the cracks of old wood, clung to shoes and cuffs and the edges of things people had stopped caring about years ago. That morning, it followed Marlene Reyes out of the county office. She stepped down the concrete stairs slowly, one hand resting against the metal railing polished smooth by decades of use. The glass door shut behind her with a tired click. In her other hand, she held a single folded sheet of paper, creased once down the middle, thin as it was. The deed. $5. She paused at the bottom step, blinking against the sunlight. It was sharp, even for late winter, the kind of brightness that made everything look more exposed than it really was. Across the street, a pickup truck idled outside the diner, engine rumbling low. Someone inside laughed, loud, careless, the kind of laugh that didn't bother to check who might hear it. Marlene didn't look over. At her side, Atlas shifted his weight. He was a large German shepherd, broad-chested, his coat a deep mix of sable and black that caught the light in uneven streaks. His ears were upright, alert without tension. He wasn't staring at the street. He was watching people. Always watching people. "Come on," Marlene said quietly. Her voice didn't carry far. It never had. They crossed the street together. The gravel along the shoulder crunched under her boots, dry and brittle. The diner door was propped open with a cracked brick, letting out the smell of coffee that had been sitting too long on the burner. Inside, the air was warmer, thicker. Conversation dipped for a moment, not silent, but softer. Heads turned just enough to notice. Then came the whispering. "That her?" "Yeah, that's the one." Marlene moved toward the counter like she hadn't heard a thing. Atlas stayed close to her leg, his tail low, steady, not tucked, not wagging. Just there. "Coffee?" the waitress asked. Her name tag read Sherry. She had the look of someone who had been working the same shift for a long time. Quick hands, tired eyes, and a voice that could cut through noise without raising itself. Marlene nodded. "Black." Sherry poured without asking anything else, but her eyes flicked once, briefly, toward the paper in Marlene's hand. That was all it took. "Hey," someone called from a booth near the window. "Heard you picked up that place on Coyote Bend." Another voice chimed in. $5, right?" A low whistle, then laughter. Marlene wrapped her fingers around the coffee mug. It was chipped along the rim. Warm. She took a sip before answering. "That's right." "You serious?" the man said. He leaned back in his seat, turning halfway around. "That place burned out 10 years ago. City slapped warnings on it. Figured they'd tear it down eventually. They tried," someone else added. "Didn't take." More laughter, louder this time. "Guess they found someone willing to finish the job," the first man said. A few people chuckled. One woman shook her head slowly, like she was watching something she didn't quite approve of, but didn't feel the need to stop either. Marlene set the mug down. "I've seen worse," she said. It wasn't defensive, just a statement. That seemed to amuse them more. "Yeah? At 67? The man asked. Bit late to be starting a project like that, don't you think? She didn't answer right away. Atlas had turned his head now, eyes fixed on the man. Not aggressive, just steady. The kind of look that made people shift in their seats without knowing why. The man cleared his throat and looked away first. Marlene took another sip of coffee. "Didn't say I was starting anything," she said. The room quieted just a little. Not enough to stop the murmurs, but enough to notice the space around her. Sherry slid a small plate with 2 slices of toast onto the counter. "On the house," she said softly. Marlene gave a small nod. "Thank you." She ate slowly, not because she was hungry, but because she wasn't in a hurry. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the loose edge of a sign hanging over the hardware store across the street. The sound carried in through the open door, a dull, rhythmic clatter. By the time she stood to leave, the conversations had already shifted. Not away from her, but around her. Quieter now, more curious than amused. She set a couple of bills on the counter, more than the coffee cost. "You didn't have to," Sherry started. Marlene shook her head once. "It's fine." Atlas rose with her without being told. As they stepped back out into the light, the wind caught the edge of the folded paper in her hand, trying to pull it loose. She tightened her grip. Across town, beyond the last row of houses, passed out the stretch of dry land, where nothing grew straight anymore. The property waited. Burned. Empty. Unwanted. Marlene looked in that direction for a moment. Atlas followed her gaze. His ears tilted forward, just slightly. He didn't move. He just watched. And then, without a word, she started walking. Atlas fell into step beside her. Behind them, the diner door creaked in the wind. Someone laughed again, but softer this time. Not quite as certain, not quite as sure. Out here, people thought they knew what things were worth. $5 didn't mean much, but sometimes it was enough to make people look twice, even if they didn't understand why. Yet. The road out of town thinned quickly. 1 block past the diner, the pavement gave way to cracked asphalt, then to a stretch of gravel that had been patched more times than it had been repaired. The houses spaced out, paint peeled, fences leaned, the kind of places people fixed only when they had to. Marlene walked without rushing. Atlas stayed close, his stride steady, matching hers, without effort. Now and then, he glanced back towards a town. Not nervous, just aware. Like he kept track of where they'd been as much as where they were going. Her trailer sat on the edge of a narrow lot, just before the land opened into dry brush and scattered mesquite. It wasn't much, a single wide with faded siding and a porch that dipped slightly at one corner. Someone had painted it pale blue once. The sun had taken most of that color away. She climbed the steps and pushed the door open. Inside, the air was still. It carried a faint mix of fabric dust, machine oil, and something older, like cotton that had been handled too many times. The small table by the window was covered in folded cloth, stacks of thread, and a pair of scissors worn smooth at the handle. Marlene set the folded deed down carefully, flattening it with her palm as if it might curl back on its own. Atlas moved past her, making a slow circle of the room. He checked the corners first, then the back door, then the space beside the couch where he usually lay. Only after that did he settle, lowering himself onto the floor with a quiet exhale. Routine. Always the same. Marlene slipped off her jacket and hung it on the back of a chair. The place was quiet enough that she could hear the tick of the old wall clock, slow and uneven, like it skipped a second every now and then. She didn't turn on the radio. Instead, she moved to the sewing machine. It sat near the window, angled toward the light. A sturdy, older model, the kind that didn't need much, just a steady hand and patience. She ran her fingers along its edge before sitting down. There was a cushion on the table, torn along one seam. Someone had dropped it off the day before. A neighbor. Didn't stay long. Just left it with a quick nod and a mumbled, "If you get to it." She always got to it. The needle clicked into place. The machine hummed to life, low and familiar. Outside, the wind brushed against the trailer, a soft scrape along the siding. Marlene worked in silence. Thread in, stitch steady, pull, adjust. Her hands didn't hesitate. They knew what to do long before she thought about it. Years of practice had worn the motion into her muscles. She didn't rush, didn't slow down either, just moved through it. Atlas watched her for a while. Then he rested his head on his paws, eyes half open, ears still listening. The phone rang once, then again. Marlene didn't stop right away. She finished the line she was stitching, clipped the thread, and only then reached for the receiver. "Hello?" There was a pause on the other end. Then a voice. "Mom?" She leaned back slightly. "Elena." Her daughter sounded farther away than the line suggested. Tired, maybe, or distracted. "I heard something," Elena said. "From Mrs. Calder. She said you bought a house?" Marlene looked at the paper on the table. "Yes." Another pause. Longer this time. "Mom, they said it was damaged. Like really bad. It needs work." "That's not what I mean." Elena exhaled sharply. "Why would you do that? You're already managing fine where you are." Marlene didn't answer right away. She glanced toward Atlas. He hadn't moved, but his ears had shifted slightly, turned toward her voice. "It was available," she said. "That's not a reason," Elena replied. "That's—" She stopped herself. "You could have called me first." Marlene's hand rested lightly on the edge of the table. "You've been busy. That doesn't mean you make decisions like this on your own." "I always have." Silence again. On the other end, something rustled. Maybe papers. Maybe just movement. "Are you planning to live there?" Elena asked. "Yes." A sharper inhale. "Mom, that doesn't make sense." "It does to me." The line went quiet long enough that Marlene thought the call had dropped. Then, softer. "I just don't want you getting hurt." Marlene's gaze drifted to the window. Outside, the land stretched flat and pale under the afternoon light. Nothing moved out there except the wind. "I'll be careful," she said. Elena didn't sound convinced, but she didn't argue again. "Call me," she said finally. "If anything, just call me." "I will." The line clicked. Marlene set the receiver back in place. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she picked up the cushion again and turned it in her hands. The tear was small, easy to fix. Across the room, Atlas lifted his head. He watched her, not questioning, not concerned, just there, the way he always was. Marlene threaded the needle again. The machine started up once more, filling the quiet space with its steady rhythm. Outside, the wind shifted, and somewhere beyond the edge of town, past the last line of fences and broken road, the burned house waited, unchanged, unclaimed. For now. The drive out to Coyote Bend took longer than it should have, not because of distance, but because the road refused to stay straight. It curved around dry gullies, dipped where rainwater used to run years ago, and narrowed until the truck tires pressed close to the edge of loose gravel. Marlene kept both hands on the wheel. Atlas sat in the passenger seat, upright, steady. He didn't lean with the turns. He adjusted before they came, like he could feel the road shifting under them before the tires did. The farther they went, the quieter it got. No houses, no fences, just stretches of pale land and the occasional cluster of scrub that looked like it had given up trying to grow. When the house finally came into view, it didn't stand out. It sank. That was the first thing she noticed. Not collapsed exactly, but settled low into the earth, like it had been pressed down over time. The roofline sagged in the middle. One corner leaned just enough to feel wrong. Marlene pulled the truck to a stop a few yards away. The engine ticked as it cooled. Neither of them moved right away. The front of the house faced the road, if you could call it that. The windows were dark, some broken, some boarded with mismatched wood that had warped and pulled away at the edges. The siding was burned in patches, blackened and peeled back to reveal gray wood underneath. There was no sound, no wind through trees, no distant cars. Just the faint creak of something shifting inside the structure, like it was settling deeper into itself. Marlene opened the door and stepped out. The air smelled different here. Dry, yes, but layered with something older. Burnt wood that hadn't fully faded. Dampness trapped where it shouldn't be. A smell that lingered low, close to the ground. Atlas jumped down beside her. This time he didn't wait for a cue. He moved forward slowly, nose low, scanning. Not rushed, not hesitant. Just deliberate. Marlene followed. The front steps had split down the middle. One plank bowed inward, leaving a gap wide enough to see the dirt beneath. She stepped around it, testing her weight carefully before shifting forward. The door hung slightly open. It moved a fraction when the wind passed through, scraping faintly against the frame. A dull, dragging sound. She pushed it wider. Inside, the air was cooler and heavier. The smell hit stronger now. Smoke, yes, but mixed with something damp and stale. Like the house had held on to everything it had ever been through and never let it go. Light filtered in through the broken windows, thin and uneven. It caught dust suspended in the air, turning it into slow-moving lines that shifted with every step. Marlene stood just inside the doorway. She didn't rush in. Her eyes moved first. The main room stretched out in front of her, smaller than it looked from outside. The floor dipped slightly toward the center, boards warped and uneven. A section near the far wall had collapsed inward, leaving a shallow depression filled with debris. The ceiling told its own story. Dark stains spread outward in irregular shapes, some old, some newer. Water had found its way in over time, marking paths along the wood. Atlas stepped past her. His nails clicked softly against the floorboards, the sound echoing more than it should have in such a small space. He paused near the center of the room, head lowered, ears forward, listening. Marlene moved further in. Each step had to be placed carefully. The boards didn't feel solid underfoot, not ready to give way, but not steady either. She reached out and touched the wall beside her. The surface was rough, charred in places, flaking under her fingers. Beneath that, the wood felt dry, still intact. "Seen worse?" she murmured. It wasn't for anyone else. Atlas moved toward the back of the house. There was a narrow hallway, barely wide enough for two people to pass. The door frames were uneven, slightly tilted. One door hung off its hinges completely, resting against the wall at an angle. He stepped through each space without hesitation. Kitchen. Empty cabinets, one door missing. The sink pulled away from the wall, pipes exposed. Bathroom. Cracked tile. A mirror clouded over so heavily it barely reflected anything. Bedroom. A single window with a long crack running corner to corner. The frame warped inward. Atlas stopped in the hallway. Not at the end. Not near the door. Just halfway. He stood still. Marlene noticed. She didn't say anything, just watched. His head tilted slightly. Then he stepped forward again, continuing his slow inspection, like nothing had happened. Marlene followed him into the bedroom. She stood there for a moment, taking it in. It was worse than the rest of the house. The floor here dipped more noticeably. The wall along the far side showed signs of deeper damage, burn marks that spread unevenly, stopping abruptly near the baseboard. She crouched slightly, pressing her hand to the floor. Solid enough. Not good, but not gone. She stood again. Atlas circled once, then moved back toward the hallway. This time, when he passed that same spot, he slowed. Just a fraction. His nose dipped toward the wall. Then he lifted his head and kept walking. Marlene watched him go. A small pause. Nothing more. Outside, the wind shifted again, pushing through the broken windows and sending a faint ripple through the loose boards. The house responded with a soft creak. Marlene walked back to the main room. She turned once more, looking at the space as a whole. The damage, the silence, the weight of it. It should have felt like too much, too far gone. But it didn't. Not entirely. Atlas came to stand beside her. He didn't sit. He didn't lie down. He just stood there, facing the same direction she was, watching the house. Waiting. Marlene exhaled slowly. Then she stepped back outside. The sunlight felt sharper after the dim interior. She turned, looking at the house from the yard now. Burned, warped, left behind. $5. A few miles away, people were still laughing. She could almost hear it. But out here, it didn't carry. Out here, it was just the wind and the quiet. Marlene rested her hand briefly on the truck door. Then she looked at Atlas. He met her gaze, steady as ever. No hesitation, no doubt. Just presence. She nodded once. "All right," she said. And for the first time since leaving the county office, the word sounded like a decision, not a reaction. A beginning. Atlas shifted his weight, and the two of them stood there, facing the house nobody wanted, not turning away. By sunset, the wind had picked up. It slipped through the broken windows, moved across the warped floors, and found its way into every open seam. The house didn't block it. It let it pass, like it had stopped trying to keep anything out. Marlene came back the next morning with what she could carry. A small toolbox, 2 blankets, a folding chair, a camping stove that rattled when she set it down. That was enough, for now. She didn't announce it, didn't tell anyone she was moving in. There wasn't much left in the trailer worth hauling anyway. A few clothes, some fabric, the sewing machine. She'd come back for that later. Atlas jumped out of the truck first. He moved through the yard like he remembered it. Straight to the porch. Straight through the doorway. Inside, nothing had changed. The smell still hung low. The boards still shifted slightly under weight. The silence still felt heavier than it should. Marlene set the folding chair near the least damaged section of the main room. She tested it once before sitting. The metal legs scraped against the floor. A small sound, but in that space it echoed. She unfolded one of the blankets and laid it across the chair. Not for comfort, just to soften the edge of it. Atlas circled once before settling near the doorway, not lying fully down, not relaxed. Watching. The first night came early. Out here, the light dropped fast once the sun dipped behind the low hills. The temperature followed just as quickly. The warmth didn't linger the way it did in town. Marlene layered what she had. 2 shirts, a jacket. The blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. She lit the stove, careful with the flame. The small blue flicker didn't give off much heat, but it was something. Enough to warm a tin cup of water. Enough to keep her hands from stiffening. Atlas stayed close, closer than usual. When the wind pushed harder against the house, he shifted slightly, adjusting his position so he faced the direction it came from. Always aware, always tracking. That night, sleep came in pieces. Not because of fear, because of the cold and the sounds. The house moved, not in any one direction, but in small, uneven adjustments. Boards settling, nails shifting, a faint drip somewhere deeper inside. Marlene didn't get up to check it. Not yet. She pulled the blanket tighter and closed her eyes. Morning came pale and thin. The light filtered in through the broken glass, cutting across the floor in narrow lines. Dust hung in the air, drifting slowly through it. Marlene stood stiffly, her joints protesting the cold. Atlas was already up. He had made another round of the house before she fully woke. His tracks, light impressions in the dust, marked his path. Doorway, hallway, back again. He paused near that same section of wall again. Just for a second, then moved on. Marlene noticed, but she didn't stop. Not yet. She stepped outside. The air was sharp, the kind that cleared your head whether you wanted it to or not. She stretched her hands open and closed, bringing feeling back into her fingers. Across the open land, the town was barely visible, just a cluster of low shapes and dull colors in the distance. Far enough. She went back inside and started. Not with anything big, just small things, clearing debris from the main room, stacking broken boards to one side, opening what windows she could to let the air move through. The work was slow, measured, every step tested before weight shifted. Atlas stayed inside, moving as she moved. When she crossed the room, he adjusted his position. When she stopped, he stopped. Late morning, a truck passed on the road. Slower than it needed to. The driver didn't stop, but the head turned. The look lingered. Word was spreading. By afternoon, another truck. This one slowed more. 2 men inside, one pointed. Marlene didn't look up. She kept working. The rhythm mattered. Pick up, move, set down, again. The calls came later. She heard the phone buzzing in her jacket pocket just before sunset. Didn't check it right away. Finished what she was doing first, then pulled it out. 2 missed calls, same number. She pressed it back. "Mom?" Her son's voice this time. "Daniel. I'm here. What are you doing out there?" No greeting. Just straight to it. "Elena told me you moved into that place." "I did. That house is barely standing." "It's standing." A pause, then a heavier breath. "You don't need to prove anything like this." Marlene leaned her shoulder against the wall. The wood was cold through her jacket. "I'm not proving anything." "Then what is it?" he asked. She looked across the room, at the uneven floor, the broken ceiling, the light slipping through where it shouldn't. Then at Atlas. He stood near the hallway again, still, watching. "Just something I'm doing," she said. "That's not an answer. It's the one I have." Silence filled the line. Then softer. "You could come stay with me for a while, just until you figure things out." Marlene didn't answer right away. The wind moved through the house again, brushing past the walls like it knew the way. "I'm already here," she said. Another pause. Longer this time. "You're stubborn," Daniel said finally. Marlene gave the smallest hint of a smile. "Been that way a while." He let out a quiet breath. "Just be careful, all right?" I will. The line ended. Marlene slipped the phone back into her pocket. Outside, the sky had turned that deep, empty blue that came just before dark, the kind that made everything feel farther away than it was. Inside, the house creaked again. Not loud, just enough. Atlas moved. Not toward the door, not toward her. Back to that same section of wall. He stood there longer this time, head lowered, ears forward. Still. Marlene watched him, then looked away. There was still too much to do. She lit the stove again, set the cup on top, waited for the water to warm. The house didn't feel like much yet. Not safe, not comfortable. But it held. That was enough for now. Outside, another car passed, slowed, then kept going. And inside, Marlene Reyes stood in the middle of a place no one else wanted, and kept working. The days settled into a rhythm, not an easy one, not a comfortable one, but steady. Morning came with cold air and stiff hands. She would step outside first, breathe in the sharp dryness, and let her body wake up before going back in. The house always felt colder than the outside at dawn, like it held on to the night longer than it should. Atlas was always up before her. By the time she stood, he had already walked the perimeter. The yard, the porch, the edges where the dirt shifted into brittle grass. Then inside again. Same path, same order. Doorway, main room, hallway, back, always the same. Marlene noticed things slowly, not all at once, not like a realization, more like pieces falling into place without asking permission. The first was how Atlas moved through the house. He didn't wander. He checked. Every corner, every entry point, every window, broken or not. His nose stayed low when he moved, tracing something invisible along the floor, then lifting slightly when he paused. But it wasn't just that. It was where he stopped. The same place. Every time. Halfway down the hallway. Not in the bedroom. Not in the kitchen. Not near the front door. Just there. At first, it didn't seem like much. A pause. A shift. Then he'd move on. But over the next few days, Marlene started to see the pattern. He lingered longer at night. Especially when the house was quiet. Especially when the wind dropped and the sounds inside became clearer. One evening, just after the sun had set, she sat in the folding chair with the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The stove had burned out, leaving only a faint warmth behind. Atlas stood in the hallway again. Still. His body wasn't tense, not alarmed, but focused. Marlene watched him from where she sat. "What is it?" she asked quietly. He didn't turn, didn't react to her voice, just stayed there. She waited a few seconds, then stood up, the chair scraping softly behind her. Each step toward him felt louder than it should. The floor creaked under her weight. The house shifted slightly, like it was adjusting to her presence. Atlas didn't move when she came up beside him. He kept his eyes on the wall. Marlene followed his gaze. There was nothing there, just the same rough surface, burned in places, darkened unevenly. The lower section near the baseboard looked less damaged than the rest, but not enough to stand out at a glance. She reached out and placed her hand against it. Cold, dry, solid, or at least, it felt that way. Atlas lowered his head slightly, not touching the wall, just close enough that his breath brushed against it. Marlene tapped lightly with her knuckles, a dull sound. Normal enough. She tapped again, a little higher. Same. She let her hand fall back to her side. Probably nothing, she said. Atlas didn't respond. After a moment, he stepped away. Just like that. Back toward the main room. Like the moment had passed. Marlene stood there a second longer, then turned and followed. The next day, the wind picked up again. It pushed harder through the broken windows, carrying dust into the house in thin, shifting lines. Marlene spent most of the morning clearing a path through the main room, stacking debris more neatly against the wall. Work helped. It kept her from thinking too much. But even as she moved from one task to the next, she noticed Atlas. Always the same. Check the space. Return to the hallway. Pause. Move on. That night, the temperature dropped faster. The cold settled into the floor, climbed up through her boots, and stayed there. She sat closer to the stove this time, holding her hands over the small flame. Atlas lay near the doorway, until he didn't. He stood suddenly. No sound, no warning, just up. Marlene looked over. He walked straight to the hallway again, slower this time, more deliberate. He reached the same spot, stopped, and didn't move. Minutes passed, the kind that stretch longer when nothing changes. Marlene set the cup down and stood again. She didn't call to him this time, didn't ask. She just walked over. When she reached him, she didn't go straight to the wall. She watched him first. His ears were forward, not flicking, not reacting to distant sounds. Fixed. His breathing was steady, but his body was waiting. For what? She couldn't tell. Marlene turned toward the wall. This time she didn't tap it lightly. She knocked. A little firmer. The sound came back. Dull, but something in it felt off. Not hollow. Not quite. But not as solid as the rest of the house either. She stepped to the left, knocked again. Solid. To the right. Solid. Back to the same spot. She knocked once more. That same slight difference. Barely there. Easy to miss. She stood still, listening. The house creaked around them. The wind pressed faintly against the outer walls. But underneath that, nothing. No sound from inside. No movement. Just the quiet. Marlene let out a slow breath. "It's just the wall," she said, more to herself than to him. Atlas didn't move, didn't turn. He stayed right where he was, watching, waiting. Marlene stepped back. "Not tonight," she said quietly. She turned and walked back to the main room. Atlas remained for a few seconds longer. Then, finally, he followed. Later, as she lay wrapped in the blanket, staring at the ceiling where the stains spread like old maps, the thought stayed with her. That sound, that small difference, it could have been nothing. Old wood, fire damage, years of weather. But Atlas didn't treat it like nothing, and he didn't repeat mistakes. She turned slightly, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Across the room, Atlas lay near the doorway again, but his head wasn't down. His eyes were open, facing the hallway, watching, the way he had been since the first day, the way he kept doing, over and over again. And for the first time, Marlene didn't dismiss it completely. She didn't act on it either. Not yet. But the question had settled in. Quiet. Persistent. And no longer easy to ignore. Marlene didn't act on it right away. She gave it a day, then another. Work came first. It always had. Clearing debris, reinforcing loose boards, patching what she could reach without tearing anything apart. The kind of work that made sense because it was visible, immediate. The wall wasn't. It just stood there, unchanged, waiting. Atlas didn't forget it. If anything, he became more precise about it. He no longer paused casually. He went there with intention. Each pass through the house brought him back to that same spot. He would stand, nose close to the surface, breathing slow, as if listening for something deeper than sound. By the fourth day, Marlene stopped pretending it didn't matter. That morning, the air felt different. Still, no wind pushing through the broken windows, no shifting boards. The kind of quiet that made small sounds feel louder than they were. She stood in the main room, looking toward the hallway. Atlas was already there. Of course he was. He didn't move when she approached, didn't step aside. He just shifted slightly, giving her space to stand beside him. Marlene placed her hand against the wall again. Same spot. Cold. Dry. She knocked, once, then again. That same subtle difference came back. Not hollow, not quite solid. Something in between. She stepped back, looked at the length of the wall, then back at that one section. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "All right?" she said under her breath. Atlas's ears flicked. Marlene walked back into the main room and reached for her toolbox. It wasn't much. Just a hammer, a flat pry bar, a few worn tools she'd kept from years of repair work. She hesitated for a moment. Not out of fear, out of habit. You didn't tear into something unless you had to. But this wasn't just something. Not anymore. She returned to the hallway. Atlas stepped back this time, but he didn't leave. He stayed close, watching. Marlene crouched slightly and pressed the edge of the pry bar against the seam near the baseboard. The wood there was darker, less damaged than the rest. She tapped lightly with the hammer. The sound echoed faintly. Again, a little firmer. The tool slipped under the edge just enough to catch. She pulled. At first, nothing happened. The wood resisted, held in place by time more than nails. She adjusted her grip and pulled again. This time, the board shifted. A small crack ran along the edge. Dust loosened, falling in thin lines to the floor. Atlas leaned forward slightly, not interfering, just closer. Marlene worked slowly. No rush, no force that might break more than it revealed. Another pull, another shift. The board loosened further, the sound of old nails giving way faint but sharp in the quiet space. Finally, the piece came free. She set it aside carefully. Behind it, the structure of the wall showed itself. Support beams, inner framing, and something else. A space. Not large, but deliberate. Marlene stilled. Her breath slowed. Atlas stepped closer. His nose moved toward the opening, but he didn't push in. He waited. Marlene leaned in. There was something inside. Wrapped, tightly. A dull gray cloth, worn at the edges but still intact. It had been folded carefully, not stuffed, placed, not forgotten. She reached in slowly. Her fingers brushed against metal beneath the fabric. Cool, solid. She pulled it free. A small container, rectangular, heavy for its size. The surface dulled by time but not rusted through. Marlene sat back slightly on her heels. For a moment she didn't open it. She just held it. Atlas sat down beside her, quiet, present, waiting. Marlene unwrapped the cloth. The fabric gave way easily, the folds loosening after years of being undisturbed. The container had a simple latch. No lock, just a clasp. She hesitated again, then lifted it. The lid opened with a faint resistance. Inside, paper, stacked, bound. carefully preserved. Marlene lifted the top piece. It was thicker than regular paper, yellowed but not fragile. Handwritten markings spread across it. Lines, measurements, notes in faded ink. A map. Not of the house alone. More. She flipped to the next. Another document. More markings, boundaries, angles, sections that didn't match what she had seen in the county records. Her brow furrowed slightly. "This doesn't," she murmured. She pulled out another. Letters this time. Folded. Sealed once, but opened long ago. The ink was older, the handwriting different, careful, deliberate. Atlas remained still, but his focus hadn't shifted. Not from the container, not from what she held. Marlene set the papers down gently on the floor beside her. The house creaked faintly. The quiet returned, but it felt different now, heavier, not empty. Marlene looked back at the opening in the wall, then at the container, then at the documents spread beside her. This wasn't random. This wasn't forgotten. It had been placed here, hidden, for a reason. She exhaled slowly, not surprised, not yet, but aware. Something had shifted, something that didn't belong to the house as it stood now, but to what it had been before. Atlas lowered himself to the floor beside her. His head rested just above his paws, but his eyes stayed on the space, on the wall, on the place where nothing had seemed different. Until it was. Marlene gathered the papers carefully, stacking them back into the container. She didn't rush, didn't try to understand it all at once. Some things needed time. She closed the lid, wrapped it again, and sat there for a long moment in the hallway, the broken house around her, and something new resting in her hands. The wind returned outside, faint, pressing against the structure again. But inside, nothing felt quite the same anymore. The house hadn't changed. The same warped boards, the same cracked ceiling, the same uneven light slipping through broken glass. But the quiet carried weight now, not emptiness. Something else. Marlene didn't sleep much that night. She kept the container close, not out in the open, just within reach. Set beside the folding chair where she sat, the cloth still wrapped tight around it. Atlas stayed near her, closer than before. Every sound seemed sharper. The wind brushing the siding, a loose board shifting somewhere deeper in the house. Even the small movements Atlas made, his breathing, the shift of his paws, felt more defined. By morning, the air had warmed slightly, just enough to take the edge off. Marlene unwrapped the container again. This time, she took her time. The papers weren't random. That much was clear now. Each sheet had purpose, measurements, angles, boundaries drawn in careful lines, some overlapping others like revisions layered over time, sections marked off that didn't match the current layout of the land. She spread them out on the floor, one by one. The hallway filled with them. Atlas watched. Not the papers. Her. His eyes tracked her movements, slow and steady, as if making sure she stayed grounded in what she was doing. Marlene picked up one of the maps again. This one was clearer than the others. A larger outline. The property, but extended. Much farther than the visible boundaries she had seen when she first arrived. Her eyes narrowed. "That's not right," she murmured. She reached for another sheet. A letter. The handwriting was older, but firm, not rushed. Each word placed carefully, like the writer expected it to be read more than once. She skimmed the first few lines, then stopped, went back, read it again, slower this time. Atlas shifted slightly. His ears flicked once, picking up something outside. Marlene didn't notice. Not yet. She turned to the next page, then the next. The pieces didn't fit all at once, but they weren't random either. There was structure here, something that had been recorded, then lost, or overlooked. She gathered a few of the papers together, aligning the edges. The measurements matched. But the recorded boundary lines didn't match what the county had listed. Not even close. Marlene sat back slightly. Her hands rested on her knees. "That doesn't make sense," she said. Atlas stood. This time it wasn't about the wall. He turned toward the front of the house, still, alert. Marlene followed his gaze. A moment later, she heard it too. A vehicle. Slower than it should be. Gravel shifting under tires. She stood, walked to the front doorway. A truck had pulled up along the edge of the road. Not one she recognized. Clean, dark paint. No dust along the sides like the others in town. The engine idled low. The driver stepped out. Mid-40s, maybe. Clean shirt. Boots that hadn't seen much wear. He looked around first, not at the house but at the land, then at her. He walked up with the kind of confidence that didn't ask permission. "Morning," he said. Marlene didn't step forward. "Morning." He nodded once, glancing past her into the house. "Heard you bought this place." "That's right." He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Name's Victor Hale. I've been looking at properties out this way for a while." Marlene said nothing. Victor shifted his weight slightly, taking in the structure again. "You know, this one's been sitting for years," he said. "City almost condemned it twice. It's still standing." He gave a small chuckle. "Barely." Atlas stepped into view beside Marlene. Not aggressive, but present. Victor's eyes flicked down to him, paused, then back up. "Well trained," he said. Marlene didn't respond. Victor continued. "I'll get straight to it. I'm interested in the property. I could take it off your hands. Save you the trouble." "Trouble?" Marlene asked. He shrugged lightly. "Repairs, permits, liability. This place has a history. So does everything." He smiled again. "I'm offering you more than you paid. Quite a bit more." Marlene didn't ask how much. She already knew it didn't matter. "I'm not selling." Victor's expression didn't change much, but something behind it tightened. "You sure about that?" "Yes." He glanced at the house again, then back at her. "You might want to think about it. Properties like this, they don't always stay stable. Sometimes things come up. Legal issues. Structural concerns." Marlene held his gaze. "Then I'll deal with them." A pause. Victor looked at Atlas again. This time, Atlas didn't look away, didn't blink, just watched him. Victor shifted slightly, not stepping back, but not moving closer either. "Well," he said, "my offer stands." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a card, held it out. Marlene didn't take it right away. Then she did, slipped it into her jacket without looking at it. Victor nodded once. "Think it over." He turned and walked back to his truck. The engine revved. Gravel shifted again. And then he was gone. The sound faded quickly, too quickly. Marlene stood in the doorway for a moment longer. Atlas remained beside her, still watching the road long after the truck disappeared. Then he turned. Back inside. Back toward the hallway. Back to the wall. Marlene followed him, slower this time, more aware. The papers were still spread across the floor, unchanged. But they didn't feel the same. Not after that. She crouched again, picking up the map she had been studying. Her eyes moved across the lines, the extended boundary, the measurements, then back toward the front of the house, toward where the truck had been. Her grip on the paper tightened slightly. "He came too fast," she said quietly. Atlas didn't respond, but he stayed, right there beside her. Marlene looked back at the wall, at the space she had opened, at what had been hidden there all this time, and for the first time since finding it, the question shifted. It wasn't just what this was, it was who already knew, and why they hadn't said anything. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying dust across the open land. Inside, the house held its silence, but now, it felt like it was holding something else too. The house didn't give answers. It just sat there, quiet, like it always had. But the quiet wasn't empty anymore. It pressed in, stayed close. Marlene gathered the papers slowly, stacking them with more care than before. She wrapped the container again, tighter this time, and carried it into the main room. Not hidden, but not left out either. Somewhere in between. Atlas stayed near her. He didn't return to the wall right away. Instead, he moved to the doorway, watching the open land, the road beyond it. His ears shifted with every distant sound. Marlene stepped outside. The air had changed. Not colder, not warmer, just heavier. It didn't take long. By midday, the first visitor came, a woman from town, Mrs. Calder. She walked up slowly, hands clasped in front of her, like she wasn't sure if she should be there at all. "Marlene," she called, stopping a few steps short. I heard someone came by yesterday." Marlene nodded once. "Man in a black truck?" "That's right." Mrs. Calder shifted her weight. "He's been asking around. About this place, about you." Marlene said nothing. The older woman glanced toward the house, then back. "You should be careful," she said. "Men like that don't come out here for nothing." "I figured that." Mrs. Calder nodded, relieved just to have said it. "Well, if you need anything, I'll let you know." The woman hesitated, then turned and walked back toward her car. She didn't linger. No one did. Not for long. By late afternoon, another car slowed on the road, then another. No one stopped. But they looked. That was new. Before, they had laughed. Now, they watched. Marlene went back inside. The house felt smaller somehow. Not physically, but in the way the air moved. Like it was holding more than it should. Atlas returned to the hallway, back to his place. But this time, he didn't stay long. He came back to her, stayed closer. The phone rang again. Marlene didn't need to check the number. She already knew. "Elena," she said. Her daughter's voice came fast this time. "Mom, someone called me." Marlene leaned against the wall. "Who?" "Some man. Said he was interested in the property. Asked if I knew if you were planning to sell." Marlene's jaw tightened slightly. "And what did you tell him?" "That it wasn't his business," Elena said. "But Mom, how does he even have my number?" Marlene didn't answer that. "I don't know," she said instead. There was a pause, then softer. "You need to be careful." "I am." "No, I mean it. This doesn't feel right. People don't just show up like that for nothing." Marlene glanced toward the hallway. Atlas stood there again, watching. "I know," she said. Another pause. Then Elena exhaled slowly. "I'm coming out there. You don't have to. I want to." Marlene didn't argue. "All right." The call ended. She stood there for a moment longer, then slipped the phone back into her pocket. Outside, another vehicle passed. Slower. Too slow. Marlene stepped out again. This time, the truck didn't keep going. It stopped. 2 men inside. Not Victor. Different. They didn't get out. Just sat there. Watching. Marlene didn't wave. Didn't approach. She stood where she was. Atlas came up beside her. Silent. Still. After a few seconds, the truck pulled away. Gravel shifting under the tires. Gone. But not far. Not really. By evening, the calls came from both her children. Daniel this time, his voice tighter than before. "Mom, I've been looking into this," he said. "That area, there's been some disputes over land boundaries before. Old records, missing paperwork." Marlene's grip on the phone tightened slightly. "I've found some of it." "What do you mean?" "Documents, in the house." Silence. Then, "What kind of documents?" "Old ones, maps, letters." Another pause, longer. "Mom, you need to get those looked at, properly." "I will. You should come stay with me until you do." "I'm staying here." He exhaled sharply. "This is getting complicated." "It already is." He didn't argue further. Just said, "Call me if anything changes." "I will." The line went dead. Marlene stepped back inside. The light was fading again. The shadows stretched longer across the floor, catching on the uneven boards. Atlas returned to her side. Not the hallway. Not the wall, her. Marlene walked over to the table, unwrapped the container once more. The papers looked the same, but they didn't feel the same. Not after today. Not after the calls. Not after the looks from the road. She picked up the map again, studied the lines, the boundaries, the measurements that didn't match what the town believed this place was. Her eyes moved slowly across the page, then stopped. There. A section she hadn't noticed before. A mark. Small, but deliberate. She leaned closer. Atlas stepped forward, his presence steady, grounding. Marlene didn't speak, didn't move right away. She just looked. The house creaked softly behind her. The wind pressed faintly against the walls, and for the first time, it didn't feel like she was the only one trying to understand what this place really was. Outside, the night settled in. Inside, the pressure built. Not loud, not obvious, but steady and closing in. The night didn't bring answers. It brought silence. Not the empty kind Marlene had grown used to over the years, but something heavier. A quiet that felt like it was waiting. She didn't sleep much. The papers stayed spread out across the table, lit by a small lamp she had wired to a temporary line. The bulb flickered now and then, but it held. Atlas didn't lie down fully. He stayed close, shifting positions but never settling deep. Every so often, he would stand, walk a slow circle through the house, then return to her side. By morning, the air had warmed just enough to soften the edge of the cold. Marlene made coffee on the stove. The smell filled the room, cutting through the stale scent of the house. It grounded her, brought things back to something familiar. She sat down with the papers again. This time she worked differently. Not just reading, comparing, lining one map against another, matching angles, tracing the edges with her finger. Slowly, carefully. The lines began to make sense. Not all at once, but enough. The property wasn't just the house. It had never been. The boundaries stretched far beyond what the county records showed. Sections of land that had been divided, sold, or assumed lost, but never properly transferred. Old rights, buried in paperwork no one had bothered to revisit. Marlene leaned back slightly. Her eyes moved from the maps to the walls around her. "This whole place," she murmured. Atlas watched her, quiet, understanding, even if he didn't know the details. The phone rang. This time she answered on the first ring. "Elena, I'm on my way," her daughter said. "I'll be there in a few hours." Marlene nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "All right." "I brought someone," Elena added. "A friend. He works with property law." Marlene didn't respond right away. Then, "That's fine." The call ended. Marlene looked back at the papers, at the lines that didn't match the world outside. The day passed slower, not because there was less to do, but because everything now carried weight. Every sound outside made her look up. Every vehicle that passed drew her attention. Atlas stayed closer than ever. By mid-afternoon, a car pulled up, not like the others, not slowing to look, stopping. Elena stepped out first. She looked different in person. Tired, yes, but more present than she had sounded on the phone. Her eyes moved quickly over the house, taking in the damage, the structure, the space. "Mom," she said, walking up. Marlene nodded. Behind her, a man stepped out, early 40s, clean cut. Carried himself with a kind of quiet precision. "David Cole," he said, extending a hand. "Your daughter asked me to take a look." Marlene shook at once. Inside. They stepped in together. The house seemed smaller with more people in it. The light felt tighter. David didn't comment on the damage, didn't react to the smell. He went straight to the table, to the papers. He didn't touch them right away, just looked, then leaned closer. His expression changed, subtly, but enough. "Where did you find these?" he asked. "In the wall." He nodded once, then carefully picked up one of the maps. His eyes moved quickly, then slower. Then he set it down and reached for another. Elena stood nearby, watching both of them. "What is it?" she asked. David didn't answer immediately. He spread two of the documents side by side. "Your county records," he said finally. "They're incomplete." Marlene said nothing. She already knew that. "These boundaries," he continued, tracing the lines with his finger, "they were never fully updated. This section here," he tapped lightly, "it extends far beyond what's currently registered." Elena frowned. "How far?" David looked up. "Far enough to matter." The room went quiet. Atlas shifted slightly, stepping closer to Marlene. David picked up another document. "This isn't just a burned property," he said. "It's part of something larger that was never properly divided. Whoever held the original rights, they didn't transfer everything." Marlene leaned forward. "And now?" David met her gaze. "Now, it's yours." The words didn't land loudly. They settled, slow, heavy. Elena exhaled softly. "What does that mean?" she asked. David hesitated. Then, "It means the value isn't what people think it is." Marlene didn't move. Her eyes stayed on the papers, on the lines she had been tracing, on the space that had always been there, just unseen. "How much?" she asked. "She will." David didn't rush the answer. He looked back at the documents, then around the room, then back at her. "Conservatively," he said, "you're looking at something close to 700,000. The number hung in the air. Unreal. Out of place in a house that barely held together. Elena let out a short, disbelieving breath. "That can't be right." "It is," David said. Marlene didn't react the way they expected. No surprise. No sudden movement. She just sat there. quiet. Atlas rested his head lightly against her leg. Grounding. Marlene reached down, her hand settling briefly on his neck. Then she stood, walked slowly through the house, from the main room to the hallway, past the wall, into the bedroom, the same uneven floor, the same cracked window. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. She stood there for a moment, then turned back. When she returned to the main room, Elena was still staring at the papers. David was already organizing them, stacking them carefully. "We'll need to verify everything officially," he said. "File corrections, establish the boundaries properly. But there's no question. This changes everything." Marlene nodded once. Outside, a car slowed again. This time it didn't stop. But the look lingered, longer than before. Word would spread. It always did. Inside, the house held its shape, fragile, but standing. Marlene looked around once more, at the walls, at the floor, at the space that had carried her through the cold nights, the silence, the doubt. 700,000. The number didn't feel real. Not yet. But something else did. The weight of staying, the cost of it, and the fact that she had. Atlas shifted beside her. Still, steady, the same as he had been from the beginning. Marlene rested her hand against the table. Then slowly, she nodded again. Not to anyone else, just to herself. The house didn't look different, but now, she could see it, clearly, for what it really was. The number didn't settle right away. 700,000. It moved through the house like everything else had, quiet, without announcement, finding its place slowly. By the next morning, the air felt different again. Not heavier, not lighter, just steady. Elena stayed the night. She slept on the folding chair with a blanket pulled tight around her shoulders, the same way Marlene had those first nights. She didn't complain, didn't ask to leave, just stayed. David left before sunset the day before, promising to start the paperwork. "It'll take time," he had said, "but it's solid." Marlene hadn't asked how long. Some things didn't need rushing anymore. Atlas moved through the house as he always had. Same path, same pauses. But the tension had eased. Not gone completely, but softened. Marlene stood outside that morning, looking at the house from the yard. The same warped roof, the same uneven walls, the same place people had laughed about just days ago. $5. She let the number sit in her mind. Then the other one. 700,000. Neither of them felt like the truth. Not fully. The truth was somewhere in between. In the nights she had stayed when no one else would. In the cold. In the quiet. In the decision to not turn away. Behind her, the door creaked open. Elena stepped out, wrapping her arms against the morning air. "I didn't realize how cold it gets out here," she said. Marlene nodded. "It does." They stood side by side. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Elena glanced at her. "I was wrong," she said quietly. Marlene didn't look at her right away. "About what?" "About you," Elena said. "About this." Marlene exhaled slowly. "You didn't know." "I should have," Elena replied. Marlene turned slightly. Her daughter looked different now. Not just tired, humbled, present. "I'm not selling," Marlene said. Elena nodded immediately. "I figured." No argument, no hesitation, just acceptance. That was new. Atlas stepped out beside them. He moved past them both, down the steps, into the yard. His nose dipped briefly to the ground, then lifted again as he scanned the horizon. Same as always. Marlene watched him. He knew, she said. Elena followed her gaze. Knew what? That there was something here. Elena gave a small, uncertain smile. Dogs do that sometimes. Marlene didn't argue. Maybe that was enough. The days that followed didn't rush. They built, piece by piece. Marlene didn't leave the house. She worked, reinforcing the structure, replacing what she could, cleaning what had been left untouched for years. Elena stayed longer than she had planned. She helped, not because she knew how, but because she wanted to. The distance between them shifted, not all at once, but enough. Daniel came a week later. He didn't call ahead, just showed up, stood in the doorway, taking in the space, the work, the change. You really stayed, he said. I did. He nodded slowly, then stepped inside. No lecture, no correction, just presence. The town changed too, not loudly, not all at once, but the look softened. The laughter disappeared. People still slowed when they passed, but now they stopped sometimes. A man from the diner brought over a set of tools he didn't use anymore. Mrs. Calder returned, this time with food instead of questions. No one mentioned the $5, but everyone knew. Word spread the way it always did. Just quieter this time. More careful. The paperwork moved forward. David called when there were updates. The numbers held. The value stayed. But Marlene didn't rush to act on it. She didn't list the property. Didn't entertain offers. Not even when Victor Hale came back. He stood at the edge of the yard again. Same truck, same quiet confidence. I hear things have changed, he said. Marlene looked at him once. They have. I can make a better offer. I'm not interested. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. Fair enough. This time he left without pushing, without lingering, and he didn't come back. By the time the first repairs were complete, the house had shifted, not into something new, but into something solid. The roof held. The walls stood straighter. The floor didn't dip the same way underfoot. It still carried its scars. But they weren't weaknesses anymore. They were part of it. One evening, months later, Marlene sat on the rebuilt porch. The sun dipped low over the desert, casting long shadows across the land. Atlas lay beside her, older now. Slower, but the same. Always the same. The house stood behind them, quiet, steady. Elena visited often. Daniel came when he could. The distance that had once stretched between them didn't feel as wide anymore. Not gone, but bridged. Marlene rested her hands in her lap, looked out over the land that had once been dismissed, ignored, undervalued. She didn't think about the number anymore. Not really. What stayed with her was simpler. She had come here with almost nothing. A folding chair, a stove, a dog who didn't walk away. And she had stayed. When it didn't make sense. When it was cold. When people laughed. She had stayed. Atlas shifted slightly, his head resting closer against her leg. Marlene reached down, her hand settling gently against his back. The wind moved softly through the open space, the same land, the same sky. But everything had changed, not because of what it was worth, but because she had seen it differently, and stayed long enough for it to show her the rest. The house didn't say anything. It never had. But it stood. And so did she. Marlene sat there a long while after the light had gone soft, her hand resting on Atlas like it had 100 times before. The porch creaked under her weight, the same way it had that first week, back when nothing about this place made sense. She looked out across the land again. Same dirt, same wind, same broken road in the distance. Only now, she knew what had been there all along, not just the value, but the part no one saw, the part everyone walked past.
Atlas shifted slightly, his ears lifting at the shout too small for her to notice. He had done that from the beginning, stopped where she would have kept going, stayed where she might have left. He didn't question it, he just paid attention. Marlene let out a slow breath. All that time, people had looked at this place and decided what it were worth in a second. She almost had to, if not for him, if not for the quiet way he kept coming back to the one spot no one else would have given a second glance. She brushed her hand gently along his back. "You saw it?" she said softly. Alex didn't react. He didn't need to. The house stood behind them, not perfect, but real, held together by more than boards and nails now. Marlene leaned back, eyes still on the horizon, and for a moment she wondered, how many things in life have we walked away from simply because they didn't look like they were worth staying for?